Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Bulba Gardens Bulbacast. This episode will be focused mostly around giving our impressions of the newest Pokemon games that released a couple weeks ago, Scarlet and Violet. I've got a number of fun Bulba staffers with us today, and I'd like them to introduce themselves. I will start. I don't believe I introduced myself yet. If I did, I apologize. I have a short-term memory. My name is the Caps Fan. And our questions are going to be for the intros. What starter did you pick, and what's your favorite new Pokemon? I, for the starter, was Team Quaxley all the way until the day I got the game, and then my inner demons talked to me and told me to pick the Fire Crocodile, so I did. And my favorite new Pokemon is probably Bellibolt. I just love him. He looks really squishy, and I want to give him a hug. But yeah, that's me. Let's move on to Roadhog.
Hi, I'm Roadhog. I'm in a similar boat. I really liked Sprigatito and Quaxley quite a bit more than the Crocodile, but I did end up choosing him. And I have to, just a quick side note, I did name him Lyle off of like a random trailer for a movie I saw, Lyle the Crocodile. I was really happy when I found out what Skeledirge's signature move was and how well that worked.
Very awesome. What's your favorite Pokemon, like new Pokemon? I know we talked about this with this being a pretty hard question for you, but give us one of your favorite.
I would actually have to say, speaking of Clodsire, the design and the aspect of Clodsire is easily one of my favorite new Pokemon. I love that he is basically just a giant poisonous sticky bomb.
A good choice. I would say that many of us are amongst the Claude Squad ourselves, including the person streaming the game right now, taking part in our cast, Michael Engineer. How are you? And what's your favorite new Pokemon and your starter?
Well, I'm gonna go with my starter from Violet version because I kind of ditched my starter from this version about as soon as I could. But hey there, everyone. I am Maniacal Engineer. I work both as Bulba Garden Forum's head administrator and I do fun stuff like this from time to time. Um, my starter in Violet version was Fuecoco. I was Team Fuecoco from the start, and finding out how they evolved, I am absolutely thrilled with my decision. Um, I really do like Clodsire. I mean, so this whole challenge that I've done with hey, it's Galarian Meowth. Interesting. This whole challenge with the Whooper family started out because I got a really big mouth, and when I was streaming once, I said that if we reach our follower goal of 2,800 followers before Scarlet Violet come out, I will do a Paldean Whooper and its evolution only um, run of this game, and it ended up being a Whooper team or a Whooper family team run because I needed 3 Pokemon for the star bases, 2 Pokemon for the Ghost Gym, but Clodsire's been really good. Flamigo is also one that's been more impressive to me in my personal run through of the game as a standout. But Clodsire is absolutely great. I love Joe the Clodsire.
Yeah, Flamigo is really good. I used it for most of my run and then boxed it about, I think I want to say like close to the fourth or fifth gym. But that's another one of my new faves. Flamingo design is really cute, and it was honestly pretty powerful by the time I had it.
I will say something that's come up in this chat quite a bit is that it should have had 2 heads and been called Flamigos and been a Doduo regional for this game. And I do agree that would have been much funnier, but even as it stands, Flamigo is still very good.
That is a great idea, and I wish they had implemented it. Let's move on to Fitzy. How are you, Fitzy?
Hey, I'm Fitzy. I'm a former mod of the Discord team, but I still spend far too much time there. Anyone listening who is in our Bulb Garden Discord server. I guarantee you've seen me around. I also work with our social media team, working alongside Wyndon, who hasn't gone yet, and hop into other people's streams here on our Twitch channel when I have the time. So I have 2 switches in both games, so thanks to fun trading shenanigans, I had all 3 starters for my first run of the game. I guess officially my partner was Fuecoco because he was the last one I picked. So everyone else's teams were determined by me having a Fuecoco, but I did have all 3. And yeah, favorite new Pokemon. That is a tough one. Clodsire is really adorable, and I had one on my first team when I was playing through Violet. But Golden Go, the evolution of Gimmighoul, is one of the most tedious Pokemon to obtain, I think, ever. But I am having a lot of fun with it. It is just a weird surfer dude made out of gold coins. And it has a lot of really fun, quirky animations and is pretty powerful to boot. I also have not used this one in battle at all, but I really enjoy how much characterization the mascot gets when you're playing through the story.
Mm-hmm.
Like I
Yeah,
enjoy
I
it
do not. Go
as a
ahead.
character, but not so much as a Pokemon.
Yeah, definitely agree. I can't say I've got Golden Go yet. I'm still about like 300 coins short, unfortunately. But I love Gimmighoul. I think he's cool. So I'm sure I'll like the new evolution. But last but not least, we've got Wyndon calling on the call. How are you?
I am very well, thank you. I am, as you said, Wyndon calling. You will find me on the Bulba Garden forums where I am an admin. I occasionally contribute pieces to Bulba News. I think a lot of you might know me, however, from the Bulba Garden Twitter account. And also, really quick, Bulba Garden plug, we are running some very exciting and very generous Christmas giveaways at this time of year. So do go and check those out on Bulba News. And I'm going to be a bit of a broken record here and repeat what ME told us. My starter was Fuecoco. I've been on Team Fuecoco since it was first revealed. The evolution is fantastic. Torch Song is a great move, great type combination. And I am also on the Clod Squad. I think the design is wonderful and fantastically ungainly. The real-world inspiration, the Iberian ribbed newt, is fantastic, and also it's a bit of a beast, especially with water absorb. If you stick a water immunity onto a poison ground typing, you get 2 immunities and an immunity to toxic, you resist fighting, neutrality to grass. It's just fantastic.
Yeah, I will say I don't think I've seen the Pokemon community rally around Pokemon as strongly as they've rallied around Paldean, Wooper, and Clodsire in a very long time. I won't say ever because I'm sure they exist, but I feel like everyone seems to like the little guy, and I see him on everyone's team, even the competitive ones, as you've alluded to. I recently saw, I think Wolfie Glick posted his first competitive team, and Clodsire was on there. So, yeah, no, Clodsire is great. But yeah, thanks for sharing the y'all's favorite Pokemon and starters, gang. Let's go ahead and get into the discussion. The first thing we want to talk about, I think, today is about the world. So, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet was revealed to be the series' first official, fully open world Pokemon game. This was kind of taken, I think, initially as okay. This is a good step forward. We'll see how it gets implemented, and we'll get to the implementation later. But I think that the large majority of the Pokemon fan base and kind of gaming fan base as a whole saw this announcement and was kind of like, you know what, this makes a lot of sense. A lot of other series are going open world. Pokemon makes a lot of sense in an open world, given the diversity of Pokemon that you can catch and whatnot. And Legends Arceus pushed things in a really nice direction, given its open-endedness and free-flowing camera and movement and all that fun stuff. So let's talk a little bit about that open world. What are our initial kind of impressions about the open world? Do you think it's well implemented? Do you think it's well designed? Or do you think not? Whoever wants to take a stab, go ahead.
I will go first, if that's all right. It's good that you mention Legends Arceus, because I think there's been some fantastic developments there in terms of the design of the world itself. I'm a big fan of Legends Arceus, really enjoyed it. Some limitations do include the fact that it's not true open world and each area is sort of parceled off. And there's also, I think, a bit of an issue with the species variety. I think Legends Arceus almost got there, but I think many players will perhaps remember in those last few areas there's quite a lot of Graveler that you'll have seen from earlier in the game as well. What Scarlet and Violet really nail for me is the world is actually open. It's really well connected. There's lots of great verticality. That's really important, especially relative to certain parts of Legends Arceus. There's great variety within the environments. There's small ponds, there's small copses, forests, etc. But what it really nails is it is very well populated by a great variety of Pokemon. Each biome feels like it has a really good number in there. I'm constantly being surprised to see certain species in certain locations. There's very little sense of repetition, with the exception of maybe Golduck. I think the open world is, to be honest, probably the strongest aspect of the game. It's a real core ingredient to why I enjoy these so much.
To add on to that, I also really feel that the open world is really strong in this game. I feel like adding on more the diversity in the areas, the Pokemon. One big highlight for me, which I haven't seen a lot of this discussion in videos and stuff that I've seen, but it's something that Game Freak implemented really well, which was like tying Pokemon like Pyroar or Deerling or Sawsbuck to their Pokedex entries in the actual open world. Like I remember when I first got to a certain part of the game, there was a male Pyroar. He was by himself, watching over a bunch of Litleo. And I guess based on how the design of the game works, as soon as I fought the Pyroar and caught it, literally every Litleo came and attacked me. But when I came up to like Sawsbuck and Deerling, there was like occasionally like one or two Sawsbuck with a few Deerling, but their reaction was to run. And I really love those little touches of like tying it into the lore of the game. Also, for me, I'm a bit of a Titan fan, so seeing its pre-Evo and like other just either derpy or adorable Pokemon running around in the world and really just embracing their aspects, their diversity, how they move, was really cool to see. And that for me is one of the strongest aspects of this game, is that they didn't, despite all of, issues that I'm sure we'll get to, this game really feels like a Pokemon open world game, as you can find so many different things to just embrace and love and give life to these Pokemon in a really unique way.
I think the kind of like the tied opinion between the two of you is really around the diversity of the Pokemon and how they're implemented within the open world. I agree with Winion that I think that the amount of Pokemon that you see in the world is greatly increased from previous games, Legends Arceus being the most obvious comparison. But also, the amount of Pokemon that exist kind of in one space in the world, I think is really good. There's always a lot of Pokemon on your screen at one time. There's a lot, and you can kind of from there kind of pick and choose which ones to battle, which ones to catch, whatever. But the diversity of species is the true highlight for me. I know when we first started streaming the game on the Bulbagarden Twitch channel, Archaic did a launch stream where I believe he had caught 100 Pokemon before even challenging any of the gyms. And to have that sort of diversity, I think really shows how the game encourages you to go about exploring and catching different kinds of Pokemon, as well as raising them up, whatnot. And I think the game also does a good job of encouraging that through Pokédex completion rewards. It's not much, but it's a little bit extra to kind of help influence the player, catch more Pokemon, to get more access to more evolutionary stones and Pokeballs and whatnot. I think that's pretty neat. And then Roadhog, what you were talking about with regard to the kind of how the little smatterings of groups of Pokemon add to the lore and kind of make it feel more alive. I encountered the same kind of situation with the Pyroar and the Litleo, but I also saw a male Pyroar surrounded by 4 or 5 female Pyroar in one area of the game. So it's not just down the evolutionary line; it's also across the different genders, which I think is kind of cool. Fitzy, do you have any opinions on the open world?
A lot of my thoughts, everyone else already said, so I don't want to repeat too much. But I did want to touch on one thing that Wyndon said, talking about the verticality of the world, which really does make it feel more like a fully realized region to me. When you look at a region map of an older game and you see the mountains and you see the the valleys and the rivers and the lakes, it always looks gorgeous. And then when you get in the game, it's a bunch of flat, mostly straight routes. Whereas, in this game, very similar to how Sinnoh has that one mountain that dominates it. There is one mountain that dominates Paldea, and you can climb to the top of that mountain, and you can look out over all of Paldea. And if your Koraidon or Miraidon has the power, you can jump off that tallest mountain in the world and fly to wherever. And I just think that's a lot of fun from an exploring point of view. Obviously there are hiccups in the game, which I know we're going to get to in a minute. But being able to look out across a fully realized country of the Pokemon world and knowing from wherever you're standing, you can get to wherever. However you decide to get there was a lot of fun for me. And I actually I challenged myself. I beat Violet already. I'm now playing through Scarlet. And one of the things I did in Scarlet was I challenged myself to do stuff in a different order and try to find ways around the recommended order of things, just to see those little bits of the world that you don't get just from following the roads. So
I'm glad you brought up Glacidio Mountain, because for me, that is the one area in the game that is probably the best area. And it kind of goes along with what you said about kind of picking and choosing which ways you can go and how to explore the world. When I got to Glacidio Mountain, I didn't realize that there was a shortcut through the mountain that you can take. So I essentially kind of took the outside path and made my way up that way.
Hold on a sec, Caps. Just let me interrupt for a sec. That was supposed to be a shortcut?
Yes.
Damn, I wandered around in circles for hours in there.
It's a shortcut because it cuts directly through the bottom of the mountain and links the 2 opposite towns on either side of it, which the game kind of thinks you might be in. I think it's like Medali and Zavapico are the two kind of like, they're the two towns that are closest to like the level you'd need to be to climb the mountain. And so they have the shortcut there in the middle. And I actually found the shortcut because I was like looking around with the camera and saw there was like a Poke Center beneath me and thought that was weird. And so I jumped down there and realized there's like a whole tunnel down there. But again, like, Emmy, like, you didn't know that existed. And I think that kind of goes to show, the kind of the how well designed some of the areas are in this game. There are lots of multiple pathways you can take. You can choose to go through that shortcut, and then there's like a spiral path within the mountain to climb up, or you can go on either, like pretty much any side of the mountain and try to climb out that way. Which I think it's good. It gives the different players like ability to kind of share stories, be like, oh well, I climbed it this way, I did it that way. Greater kind of like potential for different experiences, which is what you want in an open world game. I do want to touch on some things though that potentially we might feel are lacking from the open world. I'm particularly opinionated about one thing in particular that I think is lacking, that I think could have made this region even better than it is. But I'm interested to see what you guys have to say about it. So, what is something like one thing that you think is like lacking from the open world that you wish was there?
For me, I love Legends Arceus, and I love this game so much. Part of my frustration with Legends Arceus, and I think from a storytelling element, like I can definitely appreciate it. Um, but the colors were a little dull from time to time for me. It's part of the reason I loved the experience of the Alola region because there were so many different colors and it was so bright. In this game, I feel like um, I would have loved like the two main things that I would have loved more were like more details in the scenery. The different areas are broken up well, but I found myself a lot of the time in grassy areas with very simplistic small plants. And the other thing that like other than I would have appreciated a bit more diversity in the scenery. Um, when I got to a lot of the towns, they were very cool, very well designed, but a lot of them felt um, I don't want to say that. They almost felt like that's what suffered. One of the biggest aspects was because so much of the town didn't strive for me to want to investigate. There was a lot of repetition, and it would have been really cool to see them kind of make the towns feel more alive. Like I know that Mesa Doza, I think the name of it, is supposed to be this big area, but when I went through it, I was like, yeah, there's nothing I really wanted to look at other than food shops, which I got done with very quickly, and possibly character customization. But if they had found ways to make, like, especially the buildings or the actual main city more vital and more colorful, more real to me, I feel like I would have spent so much more time in those cities and in the actual sceneries, not looking for Pokemon or items, but actually taking in the world. I don't know if I'm the only one who thinks that, but yeah, those are my thoughts.
If I could identify just one, it's not so much a limitation. I think that would be a little unfair. But one thing I would love to see implemented is a greater variety of Pokemon behaviors. We've touched upon the way that they will act in packs or herds, and that's great. But anyone who's played new Pokemon Snap will remember there's a lot of really fun scripted events in that, seeing species interact with each other in perhaps predatory ways. So something, some regular scripted events in the overworld, perhaps to see two Pokemon duking it out, or a killer Wattrel comes down and snatches up a Magikarp. That would really add just that extra quality to the overworld. But to be honest, as I said earlier, there's not much I would change about the overworld in and of itself.
I think the one thing I would have liked added to the overworld, and this is me actually kind of nitpicking, because I think the overworld is pretty well realized as a first attempt at a open world game. I hope that like it gets smoother going on. The one thing I would have liked is one final upgrade to your version mascot. Ideally at the end of the game. Without any spoilers, gliding is the last power that your mascot gets. And I think it would have been really cool, just for like a quality of life improvement, when you finish everything or do some side quest, for that gliding to be upgraded to a soaring, in the vein of Latios and Latias in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. Something just to make it a little quicker to get around, to get to the places you're going, and to spend more time in the air seeing the world from above. I think that would have been neat and would have been interesting.
I mean, as it stands, I can't effectively glide much of anywhere in this game, but I've also only just got the rock climbing ability, so hopefully that'll make things a little easier.
Once you get rock climbing, glide becomes a lot more useful because you can get yourself up to a high point and then glide over more annoying spaces. Before that, it's mostly just for long jumps, in my experience.
Yeah, I think. Go ahead, Emmy. Sorry.
I'll give my thoughts on this one a bit too. One of the things that I desperately miss, and again, this is also a very big nitpick, a lot of shiny Pokemon have colorations that are pretty damn close to their standard colors. And I know that you can use the the auto battle feature, the Let's Go feature, to not knock out shiny Pokemon. But first of all, there are some instances where a Pokemon doesn't get knocked out by the auto battle, or your Pokemon refuses to, and it's still not shiny. And it's still, if you're kind of soaring above, or if you're having the little visual or audio cue that there's a shiny Pokemon would be appreciated. Also, the Overlord has just joined us. But yeah, as far as the overworld goes, as far as the world itself goes, I also do agree with what Poke Delta said. There's a lot of open space with not much other than Pokemon, and it really, really sets off my OCD that I can't get all of the items or all of the TMs or all of the things like that. So I'm gonna, yeah, I mean that's my thoughts in a nutshell. But let's.
Well, if I could just interject for a brief moment, I'm actually going to disagree slightly with you there, Emmy and Poke Delta, because the thing that really keeps me coming back and keeps me driving forward in the overworld is almost wherever you are, if you do a 360, there will usually be an item or perhaps a TM within your line of sight somewhere. And for me, I find those are little breadcrumbs throughout gameplay. I run over and get the item, and then within a 360-degree arc, there's usually another one. And so I will be making these little hops across the overworld, being led on and on. And that's how I do a lot of my exploration.
I just want to take 1 second and welcome Archaic into the call. Archaic, thank you for joining us today. Sorry we started without you. I know it's really early where you are, and not to throw you into the fire, but we are discussing we started talking about the world design, and we talked about what we've liked about it, and now we're talking about what we wish was in it. Do you have any opinions around kind of what you think could be a good addition to the open world that wasn't in the game?
An addition to the open world. Okay. Well, when I came in, I heard Emmy start to mention some things about user experience elements, like the fact that they don't have a visual or audio indicator of shiny status while you're moving around, apart from, well, when you get really close to the Pokemon, you can maybe tell that they're a different color. And I'd have to agree on that part. I feel like we've got enough biomes, so that's not really a huge issue. So, do we have any frozen caves? I'm not sure I've seen any frozen caves, just one regular cave area.
Yeah, I don't think so.
I mean, honestly, my biggest issue is that we get our means of transportation too early, and that it is the legendary. I think it would have actually really benefited the game for us to be stuck walking for a while longer, and maybe for our first means of transportation to be Cyclizar once we'd caught one, and to not get things like, say, the ability to jump really high or to glide until much later in the game. It's one of these weird issues with open worlds that you don't want to be too open too early, because giving players too much freedom to move around makes it hard to have a coherent story. And that's kind of what I felt happened here. Like, after that initial railroading, after that point of the game, until fairly late in the game, the story isn't really that cohesive. There's not really that thing pushing you forward, and there's certainly no clear direction. I mean, they're all like, oh, but you can do anything in any order. And it's like, well, yeah, you can, but then you're going to be either massively over-leveled for some of it, or wildly under-leveled and just getting your butt handed to you with no indication that that area sometimes was that difficult. Actually, on that note, wild Pokemon, yeah, you can target them. The targeting system is horrible. It needs to be a lot easier to actually see the levels of your opposition to see if an area is probably beyond your means. Honestly, I wish Game Freak had been a bit more inspired by some of Nintendo's other major second parties and titles like Xenoblade in thinking about how to really set up the world, make it feel alive.
Well, it's funny you mention that, because I actually have an answer for you. And first, I want to touch on your earlier point of making the world feel too open too early. I agree that can be an issue. I don't necessarily think it was an issue in this game because the stories were so separated. But I can see what you mean regarding, like, take Breath of the Wild, for example. You get the ability to glide and climb from the beginning, and from that point, you can go anywhere and do whatever you want. But the story suffers as a result of that for some people. But at the same time, though, I think that game focused more on telling story through the environment and through the open world itself, actually discovering parts of the story as you discover parts of the open world. So I disagree with you there, but I do agree that kind of wish there was some way to kind of, take inspiration from other games like Breath of the Wild and Xenoblade in terms of, making the region feel more connected and kind of like keep, pieces of the story engaged with the player while they're exploring whatever. The answer is side quests. This game has no side quests. There are like 4 side quests. There's the side quest to get the ruined armor. That's a side quest. Go kill 10 Bronzor. Go kill 10 Sinistea. Right. There's these like teachers taking the classes, which is more of a glorified tutorial than a side quest. Let's be honest. Aside from the one that Emmy is actually doing right now, I would consider that much more of a side quest. And then there are maybe a couple of others scattered throughout the world. You could consider maybe the like different regions. Beating X amount of trainers in this region will get you this reward. That's a side quest. And then like an indirect like side kind of content that you can choose to do is get all these static Terra Pokemon that appear throughout the world. But there's nothing that really I promise I'll get to you guys in a second. Yeah. I really want to really nail this point home because it touches on something that Roadhawk said earlier too. If there were more side quests and interactions with NPCs in this game, especially in the various towns, not only would it encourage the player to explore more of the open world and gain more access to that, but I think it would also help with the fact that the towns feel empty. Paldea talks all about how there's culture everywhere, but you can't really experience that culture because you can't go into any buildings, talk to any NPCs that say important things or whatever. I think side quests would really help with that.
My counterpoint would be you don't typically need explicit side quests in a Pokemon experience because, in effect, the side quest is the variety of gameplay you can get from, leveling up, training, using different movesets even on 400 odd Pokemon species. That would be my counterpoint in terms of gameplay content.
Well, and I think there are a lot of great points being added, but I do think, for me at least, one of the great benefits to Legends Arceus is that there are so many side quests, and for me that adds a lot of diversity to the game. I do think that Wyndon is right. There's a lot already in a Pokemon game that offers a lot, but I do have to say, if this game, I totally agree. If this game said, go here, battle this Pokemon that could have even had that interaction of 2 Pokemon fighting, you had to stop one, you got to choose which one, because this game does have some really great options, like when you don't want to battle a trainer because your Pokemon are hurt, or you just don't want to deal with that in the moment. I feel like they are breaking into that, but I do think there was a worry on the development side of this, or at some point, of how do we make this game work, but if we add too much in, is it going to overwhelm or mess with the narrative that we have?
I mean, up until the late game, you'd almost be forgiven for saying what narrative. I mean, that's part of the problem. Like, there's.
Did we play the same game?
It doesn't feel like the narrative was cohesive enough. It comes together later in the game, but initially, like the gym story is as loose as ever. Path of Legends has hints to stuff, and we have the payoff later. Team Star is not really you experiencing the story, but you being told the story through exposition. And maybe that's the problem, that until the fairly late game, it doesn't really feel like the character is the central element in this. I mean, I do appreciate the fact that the big story beats happen after the league. It's always felt a bit weird when you've essentially saved the region and then, oh yeah, incidentally go and become the champion later on. But for a lot of the game, I just felt like the character. I mean, and to be fair, this maybe fits in with the treasure hunt, but the character felt a bit aimless, not knowing what they were going to do, not having a clear objective, just having those couple of random things that are being told to do, and even something like Arceus, where I'd have a bit more direction on, hey, while you're out there, can you please go and help me with this study of this local Pokemon or this local phenomenon or whatever would have made a difference.
It's a whole different focus. You're, for lack of a better term, in Legends Arceus, you're a research fellow. So that kind of quest makes sense. And Legends Arceus has a rather minimal story in terms of how much gameplay is required to get through it.
Well, in this game, then, I'd say you're a student. Let us have some field trips.
The whole game is a field trip. That's
a very undirected one. I think they gave us too much freedom. I honestly think that was actually the problem, that it feels too loose because and unfortunately, the one time when they did have the hand holding right at the beginning, it came off as far too heavy.
I mean,
Do you think that Pokemon works well in an open world?
I think it can. I think it was an ambitious attempt. I like the direction it's going. I think there's things it needs to do better. And I do think people focus a bit too much on the graphics. Because, I mean, like, let's be honest, you look at something like Skyrim and how janky that is graphically, and people give that a pass. It's had plenty of its own bugs. Pokemon, I think, definitely works in the open world. I don't think they've nailed the formula for that yet, but I'm willing to accept that maybe that this is a necessary learning experience for that, and after we've got the patches and maybe there's a DLC or whatever, maybe it'll be much closer to what we were hoping.
So, Archaic, from my perspective, it seems like most of your thesis here is the story suffers as a result of the open world because the fact is it is too open and therefore cannot give the player any like sort of specific general direction, and as a result of that the whole narrative suffers. Is that correct?
Largely, yeah. I don't feel like I'm playing one cohesive single narrative. I feel like I'm playing 3 shorter mini narratives that you can. I mean, if you've already leveled your Pokemon just by randomly going around the world, you can complete those in very short order. The story beats become very, how to put it, you don't get a regular spacing of story beats. They can be accomplished in an instant. They're not particularly involving in terms of the player.
So I want to give Fitzy a time to respond, because Fitzy, I know you vehemently disagree with this point, and I know you've been trying to get some stuff in. So I want to give you a couple of minutes to like respond to this, because I know you disagree.
Yeah, I mean a couple points. The first one is, I think Archaic is the first person I've heard complain that the world is too open. most of the complaints I've heard are from people who wanted the entire world accessible from the moment you boot up the game and were mad that it wasn't. And there are roadblocks in the game. The two biggest ones are the Dark Star team and the Fire Star team, who split the world into a north half and a south half. And if you can't get past either of those teams, you're not ready for what's past them. So there is a bit of guidance in terms of the world being too open. And while I'm disagreeing with Archaic, I also disagree with the people who feel that the world's not open enough. Every open world game I've ever played, it opens like the whole world is technically available from the very beginning, but it does open up incrementally in a way that is intended but can be bypassed depending on your skill level as a player. Caps, you brought up Breath of the Wild. I felt like 4 hours ago. But like you mentioned, you can glide and climb immediately as soon as you finish the tutorial in Breath of the Wild. But there are mountains you're not going to be able to climb at the very beginning. You need to work your way up to that. As for the story, I don't know how much to respond to that. I don't want to mess up your plan, Caps. I know you had a list of topics you wanted to go through in order.
Well, I was actually thinking of going that way anyway, so speak.
All right. I will say the side quests in Legends Arceus are my least favorite part of the game. I thought they were tedious as heck and didn't really add much. And I think that while this game could have side quests, I think it works better having 3 distinct storylines. If you want a break, if you need a break before you take on the next gym because you're not ready for the next gym, take on a Titan, take on a Starbase. If you're really invested in the Team Star storyline, which I was when I played through it, speed through Team Star and hold off on the gyms and the Titans. I really enjoyed that freedom to follow the game the way I wanted to play it. Most of you here and most of our friends in Bulbagarden have heard me complain about Pokemon Black 2 and White 2. It is well known that I'm not a fan of them. And a big reason of why I'm not the fan of them is because the melding of the storylines in those games, I think, is more heavy-handed than in any other Pokemon game. There are times, and it happens in every Pokemon game, but it feels worse to me in Black 2 and White 2. But in every previous game, there are times when all you want to do is get to the next gym. You want to get to the next route. You want to get to the end game area where ice Pokemon are finally unlocked. Oh, but no, what's his name needs you to come fight team bad guys. Or, there's a guy napping in the road until you beat the next gym. So I guess you don't get the Pokemon you wanted to take that gym on with. And I loved that wasn't here. I didn't have to take a detour to fight Iono to find out what happens with Team Star. I didn't have to take on the Bird Titan to get to Larry and take on his gym. It allowed me to follow the game in a way that worked for me. And I found it, in contrast to what Archaic said, I found this to be the most compelling story of any Pokemon game. And part of the reason for that was it let me follow my story. It let me do the major story beats in the order that felt right to me. And like, because of that, even the less effective story beats, they didn't take me out of the game like they have in games past. Because yeah, they didn't work as well, but I hit them when I wanted to hit them.
Archaic response?
I mean, I'm not saying that areas should be completely locked off. What I am saying is that, and I'm not saying that people should like have their freedom to choose taken away from them, but what I am saying is that after, say, the first two gyms, really, it's not clear which gym is meant to be third or meant to be fourth. And you can say that, oh, well, that doesn't really matter for the story. You can choose any direction. And yeah, but then you lose the feeling of natural progression or a feeling of maybe accomplishment for having achieved essentially a skip and doing things in a different order. It doesn't allow you to get an idea of which area the is like the intended level appropriate challenge for you, and what area is much more difficult. That's kind of what I wanted, because I was roaming aimlessly, not really knowing which way I should be going. Often a little afraid to challenge trainers, because at one point I seemed to encounter a trainer with level 50 Pokemon in an area with level 20 and 30 Pokemon in the wild, and of course that ended up being because, oh, okay, that's actually a separate biome across this bridge, but there was a massive level gap between there and no explanation for why that happened. Like I wanted to have a bit more direction in that sense, even if I chose to ignore that direction.
Yeah, I guess that kind of makes sense. I would say, in terms of kind of how I feel about the like kind of the interconnected narratives or lack thereof, I tend to agree more with Fitzy here. But I don't necessarily think you're wrong, Archaic, in that it would have been nice to have a little bit more direction. But I have gotten requests that we should move on. So I do want to move on because we haven't talked about gameplay yet, and I do want to talk about that. But I think both of you, I don't think your viewpoints are mutually exclusive. I think that there can exist a game where both of those things can happen. Unfortunately, it is not this one. But before we move on to gameplay, go through the chat and respond to some things in the chat. Lunatoon, who also followed earlier, thank you for that, says, "This is my favorite Pokemon I've played to this day." I find that's actually not a uncommon opinion. I know a lot of people who really, really enjoy this game and put it up in high tiers. And there are technical issues that we'll get to hopefully at the end. I don't want to dwell too much on that because I feel like that's kind of been beaten to a pulp by this point. But despite that, I think most people are having a good time and would rate it pretty high. So agreed there. Although it's not necessarily my favorite, it's a good one. Round Looking Square says 999 coins to evolve one Pokemon. Damn, Ma, is it that serious? Yeah, I think that's a little bit of overkill. Kind of reminds me of like the Spiritomb stuff in Gen 4.
Yeah, but once you get it, it's so worth it.
Fair. And then also the variety of Pokemon available in this game is very good. Agreed. I think that there are some archetypes that are kind of almost too common. My personal opinion, I think there are way too many dragon types. Most of the regional dragons from previous generations appear in this game, if not all of them. And also dogs. Like, there are a lot of dogs. I don't think that's a bad thing because I love me some good boys. But the fact that you can make an entire team of dogs is kind of, well, it's cool, but it's also a little ridiculous. But anyway, I do want to move on to gameplay because a lot of Pokemon is about the story and the world and exploring it and whatnot. But the main reason a lot of people play Pokemon is for the gameplay. And it hasn't changed too much. In Legends Arceus, you had a vast difference between your normal Pokemon gameplay in terms of it's much more action focused. You can get around and just focus on only catching Pokemon. You don't have to battle them unless you get stuck and have to, or you want to. But in this game, we've returned to kind of the same old turn-based, tried and true Pokemon gameplay. But there are a couple of additional elements that they've added in. Most notably, this generation's gimmick, which is the terrestrialization gimmick. And I want to ask, how do you guys feel about terrestrialization? And Wynn, I kind of want to start with you because I feel like you've been quiet.
Terrestrial is quite beautiful. It's very fun when the gym leader music kicks in. It does open up some interesting competitive strategies. The one slightly curious thing about it, though, compared to a mechanic like Mega Evolution or Z moves or especially Dynamax, is that it doesn't necessarily reflect a straight upgrade on the Pokemon. It can make certain moves more powerful. It can enable certain strategies, but it does feel a little strange when a gym leader or a major character uses the terrestrialized mechanic and just ends up making the Pokemon actually weaker to my attacks. And so there's this big fanfare for the Pokemon actually losing a typing that feels a little disjointed. Aside from that, very fun.
Also, just wanted to note, Fitzy does have to run. Thank you, Fitzy, for joining us. But go ahead. I think it was Roadhawk who was trying to speak.
Yeah, so mentioning, because this is obviously something I feel like very designed for competitive battling, and as someone who is not a big competitor, I feel like honestly, terrestrial. I can't actually pronounce the word super well. But terrestrializing is, I think, in how it works, one of my favorite new mechanics. I definitely like it a lot better than Dynamax, in part of it being it can be used in any battle except for very specific ones. And as much as I love it, though, I do find myself not using it as much as I have others, mainly because of one mechanic of it that I actually really like, because I think it can make the game harder at times, which I do feel like this is arguably one of the harder Pokemon games that we've gotten in recent years. I wouldn't say as hard as like Legends Arceus at certain points, um, but I like the fact that if you use terrestrialization once, it doesn't automatically recharge. You have to go to a Pokemon Center. I think I've seen a couple people claim that you can recharge at one of the Terra raids. And I actually have to say that I really like Terra raids. It's more of a challenge for me, in the fact that it can happen, and like I've gotten Pokemon that have gotten just radically different typings that I could, if I wanted to use them in another playthrough, I could and experiment with that. I also really like the idea that terrestrialization isn't necessarily permanent, but adds a lot of diversity to Pokemon that we have seen not get a lot of love. I think like I got like a fire type Go-Goat or something like that. And that is really cool to me, to get a Pokemon that honestly I think has an amazing design but has a lot of flaws, and give that new life. And I think that's my favorite aspect of this gimmick, is getting Pokemon a lot of people wouldn't use for weaknesses and faults, and then adding this new element and bringing it to almost every Pokemon out there is just massive to me in game.
I will very rudely and very briefly interject just to emphasize something you said, Roadhawk. I hardly use Terrestrialize myself because actually it doesn't necessarily power up the Pokemon. Again, to contrast with Z moves, which you might use for major battles, often there's not really a huge benefit to terrestrializing, especially if you are using just Pokemon that you've caught in the overworld that don't have a unique Terra type.
What are your thoughts on wild Pokemon mostly sticking to the Terra types that they like to the same Terra types as the types they already are?
Boring.
Agreed.
Like my impression was before we got the game was that wild Pokemon would show up in certain common types. So, like this species, you'll be able to get a Terra type that's either like one of its two regular types or a cluster of types that are common for that species. And then the rarer types, which would probably also be the ones that have more risk of breaking the competitive metagame, would only be available through raids or perhaps even sometimes through special events. And yeah, it's not what I was hoping for. I mean, terrestrialization, I like the idea. I hate the visual part of it, or specifically the bit above their heads. I understand that that's, oh yeah, but we need to have a clear indication of type. But I find that part to be really ugly.
Some of them also aren't all that clear. Like, I saw the diamond for the first time, and I was like, okay, diamond is a mineral. I thought that was rock. And then it takes far too long to identify some of the other ones. Like, what the hell was the ground one? Was like a split open earth, but you actually have to look closely to figure that out. Anyway, I'm going to go back to playing the game now.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. The first time you encounter some of them, it's not entirely clear what they are. And well, one thing I do like though, the way terrestrialization is set up in lore, like it is based on a phenomenon that was observed in this region, but it's been basically turned into this technology that can be used anywhere. Theoretically, the lore base is actually all set up there that they could make terrestrialization available in future games now.
How much are you willing to bet on that?
I am not. I suspect they will find another gimmick, but it would have been nice to. I mean, it's nice that we at least have the potential that they could have just gone, fine, here's the gimmick we're going to use now. Because, as we've seen from the anime, it is a bit silly when we have all these different gimmicks available to trainers. And it's just going to get more and more confusing if they just add more and more of them every single generation, especially for why is it that we didn't see that particular gimmick before if trainers have been doing this for decades.
I do have to agree. I feel like the image that they went for how this takes form is undoubtedly creepy. I do have to feel like at some point there were some questionable decisions, and I like the power up, but the fact of like having just a giant chandelier over Pokemon or something, it feels weird. And for me, this is just headcanon, but it feels like at some point in the anime we could see a trainer try to activate this, get like half an earth over their head, and they try to attack, and they just fall over and fire into the ground or something. It's weird, but I do also really love the lore behind this, and I do wonder how they could connect this to other regions.
What you just said makes me think of Satoshi explicitly doing that intentionally in the anime as an attack. That sounds like the kind of thing he would do.
Ew. That kind of does sound like something he would do now that you like deliberately using clumsiness to his own advantage.
No, not
Is
clumsiness. Like, oh, you've got this big giant gemstone on your head now. Okay, smack them with it.
no, you'll break it.
I will say I agree with the points that I don't use it that much and makes it kind of feel like more of a background thing. But at the same time, I do also appreciate the simplicity of it in the sense that all Pokemon have it. And I appreciate the customizability of it, as in you can change the Terra type. Um, it doesn't feel like it's that necessary, though. I mean, uh, spoilers aside, right? But I mean, it's starting to make me wonder, like, do we really need Pokemon games with gimmicks anymore? Or like,
Did we
because
ever?
I think, yeah, well, it's like, do we really need a gimmick to help us, um, like, kind of differentiate one region from another, or can that be done in other ways?
Did we
Right?
ever
I,
like
I,
Gen 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, we had zero. Well, okay. I suppose Hoenn had double battles, and you could argue that Unova had triple battles and or rotation battles, but for how often, like, any of them actually show up to make a difference in the games, and the fact that double battles have shown up in every single region since then, until the 3DS era, there was no real big flashy gimmick that the Pokemon games had. It's just something that they've started doing now that they have improved, improved. I can't play and talk at the same time. God. Now that they have improved consoles that they're working with, or improved systems that they're working with, or they want to show off the 3D capabilities. I've been saying this since the Mega Evolution era, is a lot of these things have gotten a lot flashier, and there really hasn't been a reason for it. And again, I think in this series, y'all saw me use terrestrialization for the first and only time in a Terra raid battle, because I think that's how you're supposed to handle some of the Pokemon that have the Terra Shield, or at least that's how you're told to handle it. And it still doesn't work all that well, first of all. And second of all, it's just, to me, I haven't really been using these even since. Okay, I think I gave Mega Evolution a shot. Maybe I used one or two Z moves, but certainly by the time Dynamaxing came around, I was bored, and terrestrialization is maybe slightly different, but it's basically it's basically Dynamaxing 2.0. Sort of
If I
come.
can just,
Go ahead.
okay, if I can just add something to what you just said, it is counterproductive that you're meant to terrestrialize in those terror raids to get through the shield, and yet the act of terrestrializing means you have to go through that cutscene, means you basically drain your time
Uh-huh.
in a time limited battle. And why do we need to see the cutscene every single time we do this?
Yep,
Oh
agreed.
my god! And the cuts.
Especially
So
when the timer is glitchy enough already. But that's besides the
I mean,
Yeah.
I'm telling you, last night there were massive glitches when I was trying to do a Charizard. I mean, granted, I'm also like not level a billion, but there were many glitches with the timer last night. Well, Midori, Snowy, and Anatros and I were trying to do one of the Charizard raid battles, and I know post Terra Shield we got it down to 0 HP, and there was still like red in the timer, but it didn't count. Like we still lost, and I'm like, are you kidding me?
Yeah, the Charizard raid battles, as is, basically require you to be level 100, don't they? To have a realistic chance of doing well.
Anatros was kind enough to provide Snowy and I both with level 100 Azumarill.
Yeah, I felt like that doing that and having them happen before Christmas,
Was dumb.
before a lot of people have got the game, even
Was dumb.
yeah, it was very dumb. and it shouldn't have been at level 100. Level 50, maybe, sure. Make it so people need to be already up to the post game, fine. But have one weekend before Christmas for those who got the game on release, another one sometime in January, maybe, for people who got it at Christmas. That would have made so much more sense. But that's a whole other issue.
Well, and I don't want to cause this to go over our time, but I do wonder if and I'm split on whether Pokemon even considered this, but with this region being so close to Kalos, from what I've heard, I haven't actually looked at the map. I do wonder if there was some pressure within the company to tie somewhat similar of a gimmick to Megastones, and the actual element of it looking like a crystal or having to do with crystalline Pokemon having something to do with that pressure. Again, I'm not even 100% on that theory, but I do wonder.
I was thinking. I also don't want to get too much into this, but I remember having a discussion on the forums. Somebody posted like a thread that was like, "Do you think that there will be Kalos DLC?" And I pretty much was like, "No." End of story. And now, after playing the game and seeing that like open area in the map over to where Kalos would be if this was real Spain and Kalos was real France, I'm kind of like, well, maybe. But I wonder if that is a consideration that they do have when they're playing these games. These regions exist kind of close to each other in the real world. Should they have, ties into their phenomena, right? So it's definitely an interesting consideration to think about. To kind of wrap up discussion on Terra Pokemon and terastallizing in general, thoughts on Terra raids? I know we've kind of touched on some things. Just like one sentence thoughts. Are they good or bad? Do you like them? How do they compare to Dynamax raids? Like general opinions on those?
The one thing that I would say, and I again don't want to get too much into this, but Pokemon needs to provide at some point, like when you're doing the raid alone, at least useful trainers that go along with you. I remember the early days of Dynamax raids and Gigantamax being a nightmare, and depending on what level you do on this, like the trainers that are generated are horrible, and I feel like that's really a massive downside to these raids. So I would say like I'm iffy on them still, even though I like some of the elements.
I'm inclined to agree there. Not everyone has good or easy access to the internet, and making it so you basically have no ability to do some of these if you have poor internet, can't maintain a connection, is not desirable. Like, we're not saying make it easy to do. Like, sure, give people a challenge, and frankly, giving people the challenge of doing it with the useless AI is one of the few challenges that a Pokemon game can generally give you, but that they should be at least somewhat appropriate Pokemon, given that we know that the AI is not going to make the best battle decisions to begin with.
I would, to be honest, I've not played many of them, so I can't comment too much on the points race there. It's hard for me to get enthused by a mechanic that was so obviously and straightforwardly ported over from Sword and Shield without the Gigantamax or Dynamax mechanic that makes the Pokemon obviously better within context. again, as I've said, terrestrializing, very interesting mechanic, doesn't necessarily make the Pokemon better. So I don't really get that same level of excitement to catch a Pokemon that isn't necessarily that superior to its counterparts.
Honestly, it would have worked better if these had been more Titan Pokemon dens, and maybe you'd had to unlock these through completing the Path of Legends. So maybe you can get your 1-star raids after you've done the first part of the Path of Legends, and 2-star after you've gotten 2, and so forth. Because yes, you're right, terrestrializing isn't meant to be a look at me, I'm amazing and imposing and nasty, and I guess the suggestion here is like that it's some sort of like Pokemon that's been really super infused with terrestrial energy, and when you beat it, all that energy's now dissipated. So when you use it in battle, it's no longer at that kind of power level. But yeah, like you said, it's not quite as intuitive as holy heck, it's Dynamax, that's going to destroy us.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of actual like usability or experience or whatever, I think it makes sense in theory, and there are things I like better in Terra raids than I did in Dynamax raids. I like the faster pace of them. But then there are also, issues again with the timer, or, waiting 20 minutes for your Pokemon to make a move because something else is happening. And in general, it just kind of, at least for me, kind of downgrades the experience a little bit. Like the logic of it notwithstanding, or the, kind of intimidation effect notwithstanding, or lack thereof, rather. But I don't know. I'm just glad there's something to do with friends. Like aside from just trade and battle, because I really did enjoy Dynamaxing and Dynamax adventures and raid battles with friends in the last game. So I'm glad that something similar has made a return. Could it be implemented better? Probably, but I don't think they're that bad. If I had to choose, probably Dynamax. Like Dynamax raids, my preference.
I think you've made a great point there in terms of more things to do with your friends, though. They've really pushed the union circle, and yet there's probably less things to do in this game than in Animal Crossing.
Really? I was thinking the opposite.
No, I like. Where are my secret bases? Like, give me a secret base that I can invite my friends around to. Give me other Pokemon mini games that I can play together with my friends. Like, let us do the gym tests against each other just as fun little things to do as a group activity. I mean, the gym tests are all pretty uninvolved to begin with, but I mean, I would have loved to have had more of those slalom courses, or more variants on the olive rolling, or
Seeing who can crash their game first with the Sunflora stuff.
Well, the Sunflora thing, who can find the Sunflora the quickest? I mean, there's a bunch of those sorts of things that could have been turned into repeatable mini games, but they didn't, and I think that's a huge missed opportunity when they're trying to push play with your friends so much here. I mean, it was really like finally they've acknowledged the fact that like people since the very beginning have wanted ways to play with your friends, to see them all in the world. And I like the progress they've made towards that, but again, just so many missed opportunities.
But you can make sandwiches, though. No
I
secret
don't want
bases,
to make.
but you can cook.
I have not made a single sandwich in this game.
I'm not going to make them until I need to shiny hunt.
Yeah, that's the making food stuff. That shouldn't be a mini game.
It's also taken a dive since the previous generation. Oof.
Yeah.
I didn't make any food in the previous generation either, so.
Frankly, would you trust someone that young to be making food that's at all tasty and safe to eat?
Dendra can't, so I don't trust the player either.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like the restaurants in the game are great. The fact that most of them are literally just a menu is a bit meh. But I mean, we touched on that before about how the towns don't really feel alive because they're basically just a bunch of menus.
So that's another thing that I mean, I guess it was kind of touched on a little earlier, but a lot of the towns seem, even though they're objectively, I think, bigger and more open than they've ever been, they seem more closed than ever. Just because.
And they're beautiful too. I really love a lot of the designs in the towns as well. The themes too.
Well,
What kind of self-respecting JRPG
doesn't
not
let you break into people's houses?
Exactly. I mean,
there's a curious trade-off here because, on the one hand, the towns being frankly quite terrible in some instances is a great incentive to get out there and go into the open world where most of the gameplay is. But this is something that connects with some of the technical limitations. My first hour of gameplay visiting the main city, Metagoza, was a pretty horrendous experience in terms of realizing what the shops consisted of, seeing the Ray Harryhausen skeleton NPCs slowly shudder past to get at Jason and the Argonauts. But yeah, there's a trade-off there.
To actually add to that real quick, I think when I got to, I can't remember the name of the city, but it's the one that has the electric gym leader, and I think it's Iono is the name.
But the city is Levincia. Yeah.
Yeah, when I got to that city, like I remember looking at it from a distance, thinking this is really cool, and touching. Like I love the jokes that a lot of people have made on how like we're not just randomly rummaging through a stranger's house and causing chaos, but it also like one of the things for me was that there was a giant few buildings that were referred to as the retail space or something retail space. They looked really cool. There were multiple levels, but you couldn't even walk into the building to like explore any of it. At least I haven't found a way. And for me, that was like, okay, as being mentioned, JRPGs, it's a common thing, but after experiencing that, all I wanted to do, and Wyndon kind of touched on this, was get to the gym later, be done, and then move on to a new space. Because for me, that completely pulled me out of the immersion of the actual city, like 100%.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I felt that the cities were definitely, well, they're not really cities, most of them. I felt they were underbaked. There was too much repetition of stores. I mean, okay, great, fine. They're chain stores. I guess that kind of makes sense. But even with chain stores, they're not generally going to look identical between a store in one city and the store of the same brand in the next city. They'll have differences, if only in layout or something. A lot of open world games, because they will reuse assets, can feel very, very cookie cutter to begin with. And the fact that they've turned so many of these stores into basically just a menu really does not help that. And I mean, like you mentioned Iona. After the big thing they did pre-release with her, I was expecting to see something more in-game, like being able to watch them on TV or on your Votum phone occasionally, and maybe even having them like telling you about some of the story or giving you some direction, or I mean, now this is just me completely spitballing from other Pokemon games, but imagine if, other Nintendo games, but imagine if you had a thing at the beginning of the game every time you started it up that was basically your character looking at Iono on your Rotom phone in the same way that the Splatoon idols come up at the start of those games and tell you what the current map rotations are. And so you've got Iono there telling you what the current like Terra Raid events are and those sorts of things. And just like in Splatoon 3, you can skip that if you really don't want to listen to it. But that's something there to tell people what's going on with all the connected features. So, like, missed opportunities, but I mean, going back to the cities, I hate the Pokemon Center stuff. I want to actually go in a building, especially because we're traveling around and we're a kid and we apparently don't have any place to sleep.
Oh, I actually like those.
And why are we like they're set up as petrol stations, which I understand. Okay, cyclers are Coridon, Mid-Idon. It's meant to be a place where you're fueling up your bike. I get what they're doing there, but frankly, if they were going for that aesthetic, we should have had at least a few stores that had drive-throughs.
Well, I think also with those Pokemon centers, it's a way to avoid breaking up the gameplay experience in the open world. The ability to keep on roaming, use the Let's Go mechanic, quickly heal up at the center for 5 seconds without having to walk into a building and then head right out. Admittedly, you could shape that up a little more within the settlements. Perhaps there are more services within the Pokemon centers, within the towns and cities. But I do think it was a pretty good idea in terms of keeping gameplay flowing in the open world.
I would have liked the ability to camp in the open world as opposed to just setting up a picnic table. Like again, if I'm struck with the where is this character sleeping? I would have liked it a bit more. And on that note, the loss of the option to change in-game time of day is a horrible quality of life miss. We had it in Legends. We don't have it here. It would have made things so much nicer.
I'm just going to go with the headcanon that your player character goes back to their dorm room whenever they exit the game, whenever you exit the game. And that's how they sleep. Or they just roam for weeks on end without sleeping.
Considering how empty our dorm room is, how little there is in terms of decoration. I'm not sure the character goes back there much.
By the way, why can't we decorate our dorm room?
Yeah,
That is a good question. I agree.
Yeah, at the very least, the dorm room should start to fill up with decorations automatically as you go through and do things. Like, where are all the photos we were taking with the gym leaders and Team Star leaders? Where's our badge collection?
Where are all the pictures of Nimona? I'm sorry, what?
I will say go ahead, Archaic, and then I'll wrap this section.
No, I mean, like, I was complaining earlier about the lack of secret bases, but
The dorm could have easily been a secret base. Sort of.
Or something
fulfilled
similar.
a similar function, yeah.
Well, I will say that we are running short on time. I do want to move on quickly. I have two more questions that I want to ask in this cast. The first one being regarding technical issues. I don't, like I said earlier, I don't want to delve too deep into this. They're there. They suck.
Do they though?
Unacceptable, frankly, in my opinion, at least. They're unacceptable, and they should be patched. Moving on. Have any of you experienced some crazy glitches or crashes or anything? Because I found this kind of mixed throughout the community as well.
We discovered some ourselves on stream on release day. I mean, like you said, while I think they're unacceptable, I think it's because they were rushing Pokemon to get it out by the release date. There's no way they couldn't have known they were there when they released it. I expect they figured it'd be acceptable so long as they did patch it, and I fully expect them to patch it maybe even before Christmas, when they probably would have expected most of the younger players to actually get it, which frankly is not a great attitude, but at least we should get those patches. But even then, if that's only patching the bugs and glitches, you compare this to, say, Xenoblade 3, and I mean, it's clear the problem is not the Switch. The problem is not the hardware. The problem is something about their implementation of the open world that's led to this, and I did think maybe constraining things a bit more in the sense of having a bit more explicit, like using natural boundaries of the world, so you actually have a bit of loading, even if it causes a bit of a hitch when you have to transition from region to regional, biome to biome, might have actually been desirable. Or for that matter, just, getting some assistance from some of the other Nintendo second-party studios who explicitly work on giving this kind of technical assistance. Because there's really no reason it shouldn't have looked as good as Breath of the Wild or Xenoblade. And it just feels like they didn't put the money into it.
I struggle with this question because I agree with you. The problem is not the hardware. I don't care if you're going to show me some TikTok of some guy running the game on 60 FPS on his Alienware. That, I'm sorry, that doesn't matter. That's a PC. This is meant to run on the Switch. It's not the hardware. The Switch runs other games much better. But I also don't think Game Freak is totally talentless either. I definitely think they're to blame for most of this, but I don't think that I don't think that it's a fault of implementation because they can't do it. I think they could do it. I think it might be more of a problem of company culture, because I know Game Freak and Nintendo as well, but Game Freak especially to increase their staff for most of these games have mostly increased through contractors and not through internal staff, from what I understand. And you know, I just feel like, there were more internal hands working on this game. It might not have bothered, but that all kind of leads into each other, because when you have time constraints, you go for the easy option. Easy option is to hire more contractors on part-time, so they can get things done and move on to something else, right? But as for like second party, I don't know if anyone would be available. Like when you think about, go ahead.
Oh, I'm thinking with Xenoblade 3 finished, that would have put Monolith Soft available, and they have explicitly worked as a. I'm not sure if they have a dedicated team for it or not, but they do have experience working in this sort of support role.
Well,
and there's
I'm not sure
Brownie
about that,
Brown, One Up Studios. Nintendo has a few dedicated support studios. I mean, Game Freak shouldn't need to be hiring any contractors. They should be bringing in some Nintendo support studios, but I don't think they ever have, from memory. And
well, unless you count Ilka, but I wouldn't necessarily count that.
No.
But I mean, to your point about Monolith Soft, I agree. It would have been nice to have their hand in this game. My guess is, while this was being developed, most of their resources were finishing up Xenoblade 3. This probably started development right around the I want to say the beginning of the Sword and Shield DLC, because I know the Sword and Shield DLC was headed by a different technical lead than the person who did a lot of the development work for the base game, which freed up the other people to work on Legends Arceus and supposedly Scarlet and Violet, because I think those two games were developed in parallel. But Monolith was probably working on Xenoblade 3. They probably also were, their support staff were probably working on Splatoon 3. And I'm guessing they also have support staff working on Tears of the Kingdom, so they're out. Plus, we can't rely on Monolith Soft to fix every problem, as awesome as they are.
I mean, I would be interested to know what engine this game is running on.
It looks like the Legends Arceus engine with some.
But I mean, to that question, then, what engine is Legends Arceus working on? Like, how much development time would have been saved if they'd started with an initial base of like whatever was used for Breath of the Wild, or whatever was used for Xenoblade 2, which was out a long time ago. I mean, I don't know how much Nintendo's second-party studios have access to and can reuse some of that development work that's already been done, but it feels like, Game Freak is not specialized on creating game engines. They've, of all things they've been criticized for over the years, it tends to be more on the graphical side than the gameplay side. And certainly they were the first ones to admit, hey, these are our first attempts at 3D, etc., etc. And when you think about it, they've had a relatively short progression from pure 2D to bringing in 3D to open world.
Right.
And I feel like maybe, if this is a completely in-house engine, then that's perhaps effort that could have been better invested by getting something from their Nintendo second parties and building the elements they needed on top of that.
Yeah, I could talk about development theories for hours. I genuinely love this sort of speculation. But there is one other question I want to bring up But before I do that, circling back around, did anyone else find any like weird glitches? Like anyone else have like a crazy glitch experience they want to share or no?
So,
Oh,
so I mean, first of all, the rideless ride Pokemon or the invisible ride Pokemon is probably the favorite one that I've discovered in this stream. Snowy yesterday was apparently before I got to the stream, but he sent me the clip. Snowy yesterday had a battle where he was battling something on top of a watchtower, and his Pokemon fell off the edge of the watchtower, and he was still battling. Like it looked like he was battling the Pokemon. I don't know if that's a glitch or if that's a or if that's a if that's just a weird graphical thing that they didn't really consider. But that's still fairly amusing.
I think for me, I don't know if this is a not, but I was in again. I'm terrible with the names of these cities at this point, but I was in the I was about to finish battling the water type gym leader, do the battle with Mona. And again, I don't know if this is a glitch or just something else, but I was going to take Miraidon and jump off the ledge, and I guess I was too close to the lever system, so it actually forced it jumped off, force stopped it, and allowed me to be at the bottom of the lift, and then it forced me back up to the top of the city to then ride down. That one was strange to me.
I'm probably fairly unique in as much as not having experienced, but there was a single cliff that I clipped into and got stuck there and then got repositioned all of 5 seconds later. So I've been pretty much glitch free. I will say that the overworld experience is a little janky. I'm sure anyone watching the footage on stream right now will see a couple of things every so often that just look a little bit odd. For me, that's not particularly
That's
immersion
not true,
breaking.
Wyndon. I don't have webcam.
Hardy, hardy, ha. As I said, the real heartbreaking moment for me earlier in my playthrough was walking into Metagoza and seeing everyone walk around like the Tin Man, and that really janked me out and gave me a bad feeling until the world opened up and I was feeling much happier again.
Yeah, speaking of Mezagoza, first time I was there, I managed to clip inside a store that didn't exist.
Oh my god, I remember that. That was hilarious.
Yeah.
I think Snowy did the same thing during one of his streams. I could not duplicate that. I tried.
Yeah, it was probably coming at it from a very specific angle or something. So if I understand correctly, like item distribution is not intentional. So the whole thing that we had where I was using battles with wild Pokemon to teleport onto islands in the middle of lakes to get items on there that were unobtainable because I didn't have the ability to swim yet. That, I mean, it's still a bug, but it's not game breaking. Because I don't think there was any items there that should have or were meant to be locked away until we got swimming. Pokemon inside cliffs that looked almost holographic, like wavy visions of wild Pokemon inside the walls of cliffs.
I kept on interacting with them because I thought they were items, and every time it was Pokemon. I was like, come on.
Also, what's the weird Pokeball thing? Like when you go to the various classrooms and offices and whatnot.
It's from what I understand, it's it's like a texture, something to do with like a texture like testing like replacement. So to like note the center of a room or something. Specifically, the ones I remember are the Pokeballs that you see on the floors of the caves in the Urban Mystica quests.
Okay, so I'm not crazy about that then. That like whenever I enter one of the offices, it looks like there's a Pokeball behind me, and I was wondering like, is that meant to be an indication of which door I came through or something? But there's only one door, so it's not like I can
Yeah, it's
miss which way
probably
to go. It's
some testing, something used in testing or like building out the actual thing. I say testing, but there's no way they beta tested this game.
yeah. And it's not a graphical glitch. It's just this is weirding me out and making me think it must be related to future DLC. But what is with the treehouse in the design of the academy?
But what?
The treehouse. Look at the academy. You got that treehouse thing there in the top left. You
I
can't
have
go
not
there.
seen this.
Is
I'm going to
this
go look at this when
not,
we're done.
Is this not perhaps a reference to the themes at play within the game that you have this old school treehouse, and then opposite you have this stargazing, astrology dome, whatever the
Planetarium.
actual name is. Yes, that's it. That was the impression I
Observatory,
got.
wouldn't it be?
Oh, observatory, that's the word.
Yeah.
Yes, that was my takeaway. That we've got that very old natural structure, and then the outward-looking observatory.
Yeah, I mean, neither of them have. Neither the treehouse nor the observatory are places you can actually go in the locations, and that they were both just such standouts looking at the place visually that I was like, yeah, when they add DLC, we're going to get 2 new locations in the academy.
Well, I will say, in terms of glitches, I have only had one. Emmy, I've experienced the player character riding on air a couple of times. One of our other staff, Snorlax Monster, posted on Twitter in the first house, the camera can get stuck in the wall. That happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
Like in your house. And then I had one game crash. I think I was like moving Pokemon out of the box or something, and then it just crashed on me. Gave the standard Switch crash message.
Has anyone here managed to get the one where you get stuck doing a wheelie? So
No.
you're falling down a cliff, and you basically end up with your Pokemon landing like face first, and then
Yes, yes. Yeah, so
Backwards wheelie.
look, my big thing is I have jumped off of just about every single cliff that I can possibly jump off of in this game. It has been glorious, but sometimes, yes, I have face planted right into the whatever surface was below me. The game just like hiccups for a long time, then I get spawned back somewhere, and I have no idea where the hell I spawned back or why.
Oh no, I don't get respawned. I stay in that position and then move around the world with looking like my Pokemon's doing a wheelie.
Oh, I haven't seen that yet. I gotta jump off more cliffs then. That's what this told me.
I saw a few clips of other people who've got it, so I know it's not just me. But yeah, it's kind of similar in a way to the missing ride Pokemon. That like the game seems to get stuck on a like halfway through an animation and then doesn't move it on.
Yeah, maybe a flag forgets to be checked in a certain condition or something. Like ride Pokemon on doesn't exist when you exit a battle or something.
Mm.
But yeah, okay. I want to close this cast out because we are now overtime. I apologize. with one last question, and we'll kind of do outros at the same time. So I'll go around kind of one-on-one. So in the past, well, actually, let me think. In the past year, right, we've had 3 Pokemon games in the main series release, right? We had Brilliant Diamond, Shining Pearl, a remake, a faithful remake. We had Legends Arceus, which was a kind of more action RPG take on Pokemon. And then we've had Scarlet and Violet, which is a fully fledged open world main series game. It seems like Game Freak and the Pokemon Company are. I see your point, Midori. I agree. It seems like Game Freak and the Pokemon Company are trying to give players the option to experience Pokemon kind of the way they want to. They have different kind of series that with different focuses, whether it be on like different gameplay, maybe focusing on like co-op with like Let's Go, which I didn't mention, whether it's more open world, whether it's more traditional. How do you see Scarlet and Violet, especially considering, and I want to know Legends Arceus as well, more so than the other kinds of games that I've mentioned. How do you see Scarlet and Violet affecting the future of Pokemon from not only just a gameplay perspective with regards to the open world and the new structure of story, but also from a business perspective with this game being the highest selling Pokemon game on second highest selling Pokemon game in its first week, breaking 10 million sales in 3 days. How do you see this game affecting the future of Pokemon? And I'll go around one by one, and I'll start with Roadhog.
Yeah. So I do think I really like the trend that Pokemon's on. I think as a business and as a gameplay standpoint, they are moving definitely towards the future, moving in ways that they haven't done in a long time. I think one of the real big commentaries I heard on Legends Arceus and this game in particular was that they are getting more ambitious. They are starting to break the mold. And I think as Pokemon fans, a lot of us want these changes. They want the expansion beyond pretty much a lot of the cookie cutter formula we've gotten in a lot of generations. And I think specifically on the basis of how this game sold, with all of the technical glitches, all of that aside, people love this game. I'm in the fan base of, if this game ran the way that it should, it would be almost the gold standard, easily the gold standard in the last several games of what Pokemon is. And I do think it's going to hopefully improve. Hopefully, these glitches, these comments aren't going to scare Pokemon back. But I could see them very much moving in this direction more and more. I just hope that they add more fresh takes and more diversity instead of sticking with this formula and go forward.
Okay, Archaic. What about you?
My big fear is that they will look at the sales of this game and conclude that they can get away with releasing half-baked games and still have them do gangbusters sales just so long as they patch things later. I want to see care and attention being put into the games. I want to see them being nicely polished, and I honestly want to see them be a bit more spaced out. I think giving us these experiences was great. Giving us the options of how we want to do things was great. But of the 3 games, 2 of the 3 have not met expectations. Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl, to be fair, had been done by a third studio, not by Game Freak themselves, but they should have been exercising oversight. They should have made sure that it wasn't this 100% faithful remake. It should have been more an Horus style remake, because I mean, as we've already seen in the chat, people are calling it more a port of Diamond Pearl. It did not give us the updates that we were expecting. It really needed more time in the end, and perhaps part of their problem there is that they've tried to shove it and Legends so close to each other, and frankly, Legends sales probably suffered by being so close to Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl. And if you're just looking at sales to determine what people like, which is the metric that often companies are going to be most concerned about, they might conclude that, oh, well, Legends might have got decent critical reception, but it clearly wasn't actually that popular because people didn't buy it, so that's not really the direction we want to go. And I'd love to see more along the lines of Legends. And I mean, let's be honest here, with what we've gotten from Scarlet and Violet, you could do a Legends thing based on some of the backstory of this game, and that could actually be really interesting. But somehow I doubt we're going to get that.
At least not in the next couple of generations.
No. This game, I understand they wanted it out by Christmas, but given how much it feels like they need to do with this, I kind of wish they'd just given us Legends DLC and they'd pushed this game back to next year. I've said this for a while, that I think they're giving us new Pokemon games too soon. I kind of miss having things a bit more spaced out, particularly as an older player who doesn't necessarily have the time to put in like 20 hours a week into a game, who has to take things at a much slower, sedate pace. Having things coming out so often is actually really a detriment to my enjoyment of them. So I know that's probably not a widespread opinion, but
I think you would be surprised.
I agree with it.
Yep.
I mean,
Same.
well, yeah, but we're also all archaic old farts here.
Speak for yourself.
So the name just gets more and more appropriate every year.
What the
But
hell
yeah.
is Dragonite doing up here? Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
I
wanted
mean,
to.
I guess it comes down to overall opinion. 7.8, too much jank. It could have been so much better. I appreciate the ambition. I think the graphical glitch stuff has been a bit overblown in the coverage, given how like people give a pass to things like Skyrim, which are equally ambitious open worlds. Though perhaps that's just because they're much older games, and the expectation is that with a modern game, companies should do better. And yes, I agree, they should have. And it was, I think, more of a money and company culture of not bringing in these other groups to assist. But I mean, we've had the history going back to like Gold and Silver of Game Freak having issues with their optimization, and I mean, back in those days, you could have just one person coming in and optimizing everything. Thank you, Satoru Iwata. But nowadays, they need more support. So
I'm just going to say, sorry, Caps, you're not going to have any luck with that mountain. That is clearly DLC zone.
Do I look
That's
like
Emmy,
Caps?
But true.
Okay. I'll give it perspective. I've really enjoyed Scarlet and Violet. I also really enjoyed Legends Arceus. Neither of them are perfect games, and I hope that the correct lessons are learned from the relative success of each. I certainly echo the point that they can't just take the success of Scarlet and Violet as a carte blanche to release games in whatever state they want. Something that does excite me for the future of the franchise. Okay, as I protested earlier, I am also getting on a bit. My time is more limited. So story is becoming increasingly important to me for sort of that single playthrough. And the story of both Legends Arceus and Scarlet and Violet have really impressed me. I think they're a great step up in tone, in particular, sort of straying into slightly more mature storytelling. So I'm really excited to see where the future lies with that. And in fact, I would be very happy with very similar open world mechanics. A lack of new gimmicks, but a new story that expands the Pokemon world further, maybe even ties in older original stories. So that's one element of the future that has me excited.
agreed.
Nice,
No,
very much so. Yeah.
I would say I wouldn't mind having a actual villainous team again.
Yeah. I have kind of I will agree. I kind of feel like Team Star is the same, or is a mixture of Team Yell and Team Skull, but not necessarily copy pasted. A little more real, but still very kind of not the classic villainous team. Low stakes. Emmy, do you have any thoughts on how Scarlet and Violet will contribute to the future of the franchise?
Unfortunately, we're probably stuck with open world, which means I'm just going to have to wander around aimlessly and be lost all the time. I do think that the games did pretty well. For all the complaining, for all the nonsense and stuff and reservations that I had when it was first announced and when they said it was going to be open world and this and that and the other, it seems to be, and again, for all the jank and for all the nonsense that has happened, most of it, thankfully, isn't game breaking. It's just a little weird, and it's almost like you're living in a world with nothing but virtual people, which, surprise, you are. But it's. I think we're going to try to continue, or they're going to try to continue in this direction. If I was to be running things, and if I was to be running things, I'm pretty sure everything would be a disaster, but I 100% would either slow down production of games in general, or I would have a more consistent schedule with dedicated teams for like games like Legends or remakes. So maybe 1 year you release a remake, 1 year you release a Legends, 1 year you release some DLC, 1 year you release new brand new game, new So like every 4 years or so, we'd end up with a new generation, and that's not terrible. I mean, I'm trying to remember how long it was between Diamond and Pearl and Black and White, and it was certainly more than 1 year, certainly more than 2 years. And while they did have Platinum and Heart Gold and things like that in between, maybe going back to DLC instead of third versions, but having that buffer in there where you don't need to have, and I will further criticize them for this one in particular, because if you wanted a big release for this year, there was no reason to release Legends as early as they did. Right? They released Legends right on the heels of Brilliant Diamond Shining Pearl. And if they wanted a big release right around the holidays, they could have taken their time, maybe dealt with and obviously none of the graphical issues in Legends are quite as bad as this game, but they could have certainly tightened up the graphics and some of the nonsense that you see in Legends, maybe get it to perform a little bit better, and then release that now and waited until next year for this game. There is no reason in my book that they needed to rush it that quickly. And I don't know if it's Game Freak creating their own problems. I don't know if it's Nintendo breathing down Game Freak's neck, or if it's the Pokemon Company breathing down Game Freak. Whoever is causing this problem, though, it is a problem. It needs to be it needs to be addressed. And yes, eventually porting out all of the graphical nightmares, I think takes away some of the personality and the charm of this game. But I'm also an oddball, so. And again, it's a step forward, but having a game that's fairly half baked in the first place, or that you clearly didn't beta test or what have you, not great. So one of two things is going to happen. Definitively we're going and we're sticking with the open world, and the fact that that's going to happen means I'm just going to be wandering around and getting lost a lot. But in some ways, I don't mind it as much as I thought that I would. But there is a real question, as has been brought up. Are they going to take the wrong lesson from this and say, okay, yeah, we can basically release something that's half done and people will still buy it? And companies have had that lesson in the past. Companies have seen that happen in the past, and they start to care less about the final product, or they start to, they start to realize, yeah, no, people will pay for it no matter what. And unfortunately, it's going to be a little while, right? But unfortunately, I would not be surprised if that's the lesson that they take from this. And the real shame of it is, this is probably, as of right now, my second favorite game in the entire franchise. And I hate that I'm a sellout.
Well,
You
I
shell.
guess
You utter shell.
If I can just connect to what you said, Emmy, about the personality of the game, and what Caps you said about the villainous teams and that being low stakes conflict and everything. I think we can confidently say that as a JRPG, Legends is a better JRPG than this game for one reason. It is the Pokemon game that is closest to having your players attack and dethrone God. What kind of self-respecting JRPG are you if you can't attack and dethrone God?
Now, that's probably the closest any Pokemon game's going to get to doing that.
Are you? Yeah, this implies that Arven is not God, to which I disagree.
He's not.
Love
I
that
mean,
guy.
Nemona is.
I'm on the record as saying, I think what should have happened with Arven's story is that he should have had Koraidon or Miraidon, and that we should have only gotten Koraidon, Miraidon, the conclusion of Path of Legends, and that we should have just had a Cyclizar up until that point, if we'd actually caught one. Or some other ride Pokemon that we'd caught.
Midori, don't you dare shame Penny. Penny is the most relatable character in this game.
Penny is absolutely the most relatable character.
Penny is so relatable, it's not even funny. The anime line, I ate that up. That was so funny.
I've literally just seen her the one time in Mesagoza at the beginning, and then all she's done since then is give me stuff after I defeat bases, and I've only done that twice.
I will say I know this is controversial. I don't like Nemona. She's pushy. I don't want to battle with you all the time. Go away.
Boo! Boo! Boo!
I think one of my favorite commentaries that I've seen regarding those two characters is that Nemona would make basically the perfect rival for Ash in the anime, but also that
Yes.
Penny is a lot of the fans' commentary on characters like Ash, seeing how many times she's just like calling out people for nonsensical decisions.
I don't like to have my nonsense called. What the hell is happening there? Oh,
Well, I know Wyndon just had to leave, and we are running much over what I said we would do. So I
yes.
do want to call it there. Also, don't want to force Emmy to stream any longer than he has to.
Which,
So
whatever.
we'll call it there. Appreciate the time, Archaic, Emmy, Roadhawk, and Wyndon and Fitzy as well. Thank you guys for sharing your opinions, having a nice chat. There's so much more I would love to talk about this game. But that's why we have forums and Discord. So you as well as us can go there and talk about this game. And everything that you like about it, everything you hate about it. So be sure to do that. As well as follow our Twitter account so you can
I'm pretty sure I just had a
our,
trainer flat out disappear on me.
that checks out. I've had that happen to me as well. That was a glitch that I forgot to mention. I've seen a single Pokeball being tossed by no one. But aside from that, guys, make sure to follow our Twitter if you haven't already. Twitch channel as well. We do streams pretty much every day now. We're missing like a couple days a week, but we have streams every day, a variety of stuff. Check us out. Give us a follow. All that. I've been your host, the Caps fan, and this has been Bulbacast, our Scarlet and Violet impressions. Take care, and we'll see you in the next episode.